Welcome to Language Time. Today we're looking at Colonial Williamsburg. Here's an example of a church that was from the time of the colonies, maybe about 200 something years old. Let me see how old this church actually is. It's actually 300 years old. So this is one of the first churches in Williamsburg, Virginia. Virginia is north from Florida, but it's before New York. And today you are invited to take a virtual tour. Of course, we're not traveling anywhere right now. And the town that is a copy of the colonial town that used to thrive during colonial times is now closed because of the virus that's going on, but we can still go to all these places by virtual tour. So there's a link on our Class Dojo class story page, and you can go take a look at that and look at some other places. There are different buildings and gardens and trees, and the clothing that people wore was so different at that time. At the time of colonial Williamsburg, even the towns were designed in a different way. So the streets ran through town and there were buildings. What kind of buildings do you think they would have had? Would they have had a post office or a supermarket? Would they have had a movie theater? A Department of Motor Vehicles? Maybe some of those, not all of them, right? What did you see when you went on the virtual tour? What kind of buildings were the same that we still have now? Like, for example, would you have a place in Williamsburg to go buy food? Or to go to a party? Would there be a party hall? Maybe those things, right? People had birthdays and they bought food in grocery stores. They just looked different, but it was the same idea. But certainly, I would not expect to see a movie theater because there were no movies. Movies were not even thought of yet. So what did people do to show art, music, to express their creativity? Well, we know about paintings. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like this. Let me show you. While I'm looking for it, let me tell you, when I was a little girl, my grandmother and my mom taught me how to do a lot of artwork by hand. My dad also. And one kind of artwork that I used to do was called embroidery. Here, we just take a plain piece of material like this, napkin, and then find a needle with a nice big hole called the eye, and some embroidery thread. See, this is not really skinny thread like we are used to seeing in our clothing, right? It's actually a bunch of threads that are combined together to make one thick one. So I would pick a color that I like and then start to make a design, maybe a flower. I don't know. I could make different things when I was a little girl. Sometimes I make flowers, or I can tell a story with a picture, like how you were doing with the Native American symbols. I could actually do that on the fabric. Well, young girls and women in the colonial Williamsburg time still had access, even at that time, to embroidery thread of different colors. See, this is a sampling of embroidery thread from my sewing basket. And in fact, they did some amazing artwork that told stories and practiced the alphabet, practiced writing. Here, let me show you some examples. This is what I looked up on Google. This looks very much like a sampler that hung on the wall in my house growing up. Can you see all the artwork that somebody put into this? And there's even a story, right? Can you see like a family and where they lived? Doesn't that house look much like the buildings in Williamsburg? And they practiced their alphabet up here. Very often there was a Bible verse at the bottom and sometimes a date. This one actually does have a date, 1776. Wow, this was really old. And there are more. Some very beautiful artwork was done. Remember, there was no TV, there were no movies, there was no computer. So people had to entertain themselves by playing games, and also by doing their own artwork. Here's another one. Wow. This is from 1879. You guys practice your ABCs on the writing pages, right? Look, this young lady practiced her ABCs and 1, 2, 3s with needle and thread. Can you imagine how different that would be for you? It's actually a little tricky to get all the letters the same size. You know, I actually am going to show you a sampler page. This is what we would call a stencil. Let me see if I can get rid of that image on the back of the page. It has something on the back. Can you see how the ABCs have tiny little X's in them? Each X would be one stitch, one going this way and one going the other way, and together would cross each other, kind of like I did on here. And look, before you know it, you could have letter shapes. See, I made one little stitch. It's like part of an X, right? And if I put them all together, I could actually make a sampler. Wow. That's what people did instead of playing video games and watching TV and turning on the radio. They would sit together, sometimes in groups. Girls especially did this, in a group of girls, and do cross stitch. They would do samplers. Well, sampler actually means an example and to show how to do a shape or a picture. Sampler, right? A sample, an example, comes from all those words that means that showing you how to do something. Well, what about making a city? How do you think people go about designing a city? So you have page 267 for your homework, and that's a city. It's historic Williamsburg. And you can see how there's a street going this way and another street going this way, but one street is wider, one street is narrower, right? And the houses even are different on each side. Maybe they have different purposes. Like we were just speaking about, if you went into a town, what kind of stores and buildings would you find? So that picture that you have in your homework, it's kind of a sample of a town. And it has an idea of a very wide street and then a more narrow street. What do you think would be the difference of the purpose for each? Maybe the wide street would be like where most people would go and you need a lot of space for the horses and carriages and pedestrians, people walking. And maybe the side street is more like where there are houses that people live in and not so many horses going through. I have a challenge for you. See if you can find a nice big piece of paper. This one's really big. Or it doesn't have to be so big. You don't have to go running to the store. Just look around your house, ask your family. And then I'm so curious, if you had a chance to design your own city or your own town, and you could draw it on paper, you could make a sample, what would you do? Would you have straight streets? Would you have curvy streets? Would you have houses next to each other? Where would you put the library? Would you have a library? Would there be a place for children to go play? Would there be a doggy park? I don't know. I'm just thinking of all the things around West Kendall. But make your own imaginary town and make it exactly the way you would want to see your town. You might want to use a pencil or a few colored pencils so you can erase if you make a mistake, and ruler. Because if you're going to make a straight street, you might want to make it really straight. Otherwise, when the cars go down, if it's a crooked street, the cars are going to have to drive like this, and they might not have a good experience. So see if you can find a ruler, a pencil, a paper, and then please post that picture on Class Dojo, because you never know, you might want to become a professional city planner, like an architect who designs buildings, or an engineer who designs the streets and bridges. I don't know, you might be a landscaper who designs the park and where the bushes and the flowers and the trees should go. And wow, there's so many professions, but a lot of them do start from learning how to plan on paper with a pencil, and very often with other tools like a ruler. I'm so excited. I know that you guys are very imaginative and you know a lot about cities because you live in one, and I think you could come up with an interesting plan. That's going to be an assignment for you besides doing this activity on this page here. Okay, and that's it for our language lesson for today. I will see you back in a few minutes to walk through our phonics lesson. See you right here.